Welcome into Basketball by Association. It is your BbA Byte, your midweek chowdown on the association and some talk about the Hoopies. My name is Arky. That is Joel. Joel, hell, oh, sir.
I'm glad we finished up the hello. Yeah, chomp chomp. Let's get this together and let's talk about the DeAndre Ayton putback slam on the end of that game real quick, because
let me just
that
say
was
this.
wild.
I would like to say that the real hero of that game is Jeff Van Gundy. Because at the end of that game, and I consider myself someone who knows at least the vast majority of the rules when it comes to the association. There are some intricacies that I clearly could have and probably do miss. And last night was one of them. Joel, I did not know until I heard it from Jeff Van Gundy's mouth that you cannot have goaltending and offensive goaltending on an inbounds throw-in like that. Because that was all the hullabaloo. Like when I first saw it, right? Like it's in the rule booklet, like on that inbounds pass like that, an inbounds throw in. Like there is no such thing as offensive goaltending, which to me was something that was fresh in my brain. He also talked a lot about the substitutions that LA was doing later in the game. Like just very, very good, by the way. Very, very good. But
I find Jeff Van Gundy, the broadcaster, to be like Jeff Van Gundy, the coach, must have been.
Okay.
Which is A, very, very good, but B, it wears on you after a while, right? Like he was always a guy who kind of wore out his players and they got sick of the message and like, all right, shut up, Jeff.
Okay.
Like that's kind of how I see Jeff. I do appreciate him.
I wouldn't say he's the best broadcaster, but I would say in that moment, he brought knowledge to where I was completely confused, because you saw Clippers players who were like, "Hey, that was in the rim. That's goaltending. That's like you gotta fix that." And Jeff Van Gundy's like, "No, I know the rules." And I'm like, "I thought I knew some of them too," and clearly the Clippers thought they knew some of the rules as well.
The initial look at it in real time, it did look like offensive goaltending by the traditional definition, but as the replay slows down, I think Ayton did get it, like, I mean, literally within centimeters, split second of where it needed to be, and it looked fair to me even by the traditional sense in that replay. Like it was such a bang bang play, but I think he got it fair and square regardless of what the rules say. Like if that had happened in game with more time left, I think upon review he would have been given that basket anyway.
Yeah, I think so as well. But like it was just sort of the initial reaction, that everyone was just like, I mean, for the Clippers, what are you going to do? Like the bucket just went in, so I mean, you got to at least be like, that can't be right? Like he can't just throw it in from the sideline straight into the bucket.
The basket was so big, so important, and I mean that's some Christian Laettner level stuff there, right? I mean, that's crazy as a way to end a game. That's so big that it's made a lot of people forget about the missed Paul George free throws, right?
Yes,
and the fact that we're not even having this conversation if he makes his 2 free throws. Like that had to happen in order for this miracle to happen less than a second later by game clock standard. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, and like that goes again. So that game featured what we don't get a lot of in this, especially this playoffs, and I think I have to go historically back, but like we have not gotten a lot of this playoff, which is kind of back-to-back super clutch shots in the last 35, 40 seconds of that game. What real minute, if you think about it, to where Paul George was putting go ahead shots up, and like it felt like, how's the best way to say this? It felt like they were 2 heavyweights, like waiting for the last punch in this particular game. And I don't know how the series is going to play out, but in this game, like they were going back and forth with dramatic moments, despite some of it being, kind of watered down by incessant reviews and such.
That did get old by the end of the game, and there was a lot of carping and whining because of the intensity of the game.
Yeah.
Like nobody was in a good mood, and you understand that, but there was a lot of just carping at the refs, and that got old too.
I read that the last 90 seconds took 33 minutes in real time, which feels...
That sounds about right, yeah.
Which feels like that's exactly what the NBA has tried so hard to get away from.
Right.
Right? Because that used to be the thing. Like, let's watch it the last 2 minutes. The last 2 minutes, you give you 45 minutes worth of basketball if the game is close. And they've done such a great job of getting away from that in the last few years that the flow of the game at the end I've been surprised, by the way, and we don't have to really get into this, at how well just sort of end of game situations kind of go, where, yeah, you still in the last 10, 15 seconds, if there's a timeout left, you still get that used. Mm-hmm. But like you don't have them called like after you've seen the setup of someone's play constantly over and over again, to where like the game just doesn't feel like it's going to have any like smooth action happening. Anyway, going back to the game last night with Phoenix and LA, it felt like that heavyweight bout, both teams sort of trading not only shots throughout the game, but daggers right at the end of it, what it felt like. Yeah. That it almost felt apropos of the way that game was going, that it needed drama to help me feel like the flow of that game, which is so much slowed down, to make it feel worth it. And I think for the suspense of it, I think it delivered.
I think it's going to be one of those games that does get replayed on NBA TV for at least the next decade, as a classic playoff game. Whether it goes beyond that in time, a lot depends on what these two teams do next. Are one of these two able to win the NBA championship? Do you get a legacy attached? Do you get multiple rings out of either of these teams? Then it might become one of those all-time type playoff games type series that, you get kind of one from every season or every other season that shows up in the deep League Pass and NBA TV archives if you want them. So I don't know if we're quite there yet, but it was really such a defensive battle. And notice, yeah. I'd like to toot my own horn here. The Clippers did wind up starting Ivica Zubac, which yes. I said they should do.
Yes.
And it worked out better for them. They started Patrick Beverley, which I did not see them doing, but I liked that move as well. I thought it gave, Terrence Mann still only had 8 points off the bench, the same as what he had in the starting lineup the other night, but it felt a little more balanced. You saw a little more Luke Kennard, which is what you were talking about last time too. The offense felt like it was serviceable this time instead of plotting, and the Clippers really doubled down on their defense, which it's odd to say that when you don't have Kawhi Leonard, who's just, he's an all-time defender. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But the Clippers do need to make defense their identity in the rest of this series. They need to take the blueprint of what they did in game 2, even though they lost. They were that close the whole time. And I thought they were the more physically aggressive team throughout most of the evening. Phoenix was still the more talented, more athletic team, and that served them well. But how hard did Devin Booker have to work? He was bruised, man. He was bloodied.
Yeah.
You got the sense that all of a sudden Phoenix's depth was being challenged quite a bit. And without Dario Saric and Cam Johnson both stepping up to have 22 points off the bench combined, that's a really different game if they don't get that contribution out of them. And DeAndre Ayton obviously was huge. Campaign was huge, picking up the slack for what Booker left on the table. I do think in a very physical type of game, that's not going to phase Chris Paul. That may even benefit Chris Paul because the pace is a little slower. You get to be surgical. He gets to play that chess match, and we're going to see Chris Paul for game 3. So I'm really excited to see this next round, the next round of this heavyweight fight, because you've got the Paul side of things. You've got Phoenix with so much upside left, and the Clippers feel like they've hit their upside, but they also found an identity. And yeah, they're down 0-2
again.
And you can't keep going back and say, well, we did it before, we can do it again. But at the same time, 0-2 does not feel insurmountable for this particular Clippers team. And it's not just the history that they've already got behind it. Like,
yeah,
they've got their identity and they can play some bruising 90s style defense, or at least what they can get away with. They can do that for the rest of this series and hang in there.
Yeah, and they're 0-2 coming back home, which will be huge for them.
Right.
Well, you would hope it would be huge for them, because again, going in between games one, the last of the Utah series in game one, they had like 37 hours or something in between games. So like you sort of felt like fatigue caught up to them in game one and game two, like such a bruising physical battle that Ty Lue, I was one of the first ones to think that was just sort of a LeBron coach, right? That it was just sort of like LeBron picked this guy because he liked this guy. He wanted him to sort of be, quote, the coach, because we have to have someone as a coach. But like in the Utah series, like he has thrown the kitchen sink at adjustments, and he has gotten the most out of his dudes. And like, I am not anywhere near thinking this series is over. Like I think Chris Paul coming back is obviously going to be huge for Phoenix, but I'm nowhere ready to say this Clippers team is done.
I think it was Grant Hill who pointed out at the beginning of the series, and I may be way off on my memory on that, but somebody from TNT pointed out that in 4 years, Tyronn Lue has yet to not appear in a conference finals as a coach. Like, yeah, you've got the LeBron factor, and certainly he takes over for a very talented Clippers team, but there's a lot of coaches who would not have been able to handle either of those situations, right?
That's fair.
And you think about David Blatt, and he was there in Phoenix, in Cleveland. Sorry, right. In Cleveland, he makes the finals, but doesn't gel with the players for whatever reason, and they're looking for somebody else. And Ty Lue came in, and LeBron and everybody spoke very highly of him. It did not sound like it was just a yes man scenario, although how many coaches that LeBron has had over his very lengthy career at this point have gotten that moniker. And then after a while, when they've gotten away from LeBron, I think of Eric Spoelstra especially, but Ty Lue is getting into that category where we go, no, I don't think he was just a yes man. Like, clearly there's talent there. And David Blatt had a very illustrious career and still has a very successful career in Europe too. So these guys can coach. Mike Brown, that one's a little bit iffy, but he's been a really good assistant everywhere he's gone too. So I think, this is a great chance for Ty Lue to build on that player street cred he had, because the players clearly respect him. They have at various stops. The fact that he played in the league, that he survived in the league for as long as he did, I think speaks to a lot. He seems to have a really good way about communicating with the players. But I think now this series and this playoffs are giving him a chance to build kind of a broader credibility with us as talking heads, whatever that's worth, which is hardly anything, but just I think the general fans appreciating too and go, yeah, you know what, he probably is a pretty good coach.
Yeah, and I don't think that was anywhere near what people were sort of thinking about him early on in the beginning. And listen, I was one of them, and he's proven everybody wrong so far, and we'll see. I mean, he's not complaining he doesn't have Kawhi. They're just going and they're just going to go grind, and that's sort of what this mentality of this team has to be right now. By the way,
and Ty Lue was really highly regarded as an assistant, prior to this at his various stops, and that's why it makes me happy that, this is a little bit of a tangent, but that other highly regarded former players, Ime Udoka now might be the front runner in Boston. Sam Cassell hopefully continues. Chauncey Billups continues to get their interviews, and some of these other guys that we've mentioned in past shows, like, get their shot. You don't have to keep going with the same old retread coaches who have been doing this forever. Give the younger guys a chance, and you might wind up with a Ty Lue, and be really, really, really happy that he's your coach right now.
Bo, what do they call it? Show, right? Bo Show, is that right? By the way, just briefly, DeAndre Ayton, if you've not been paying attention, besides that great play, like his postseason, super consistent first run of the postseason for him, and it's been like kind of sort of I don't like the good, kind of a joy to watch him. Really, like he's had a really good first postseason for that kid. So
and yet another center who fits into the traditional center mold, because everybody likes to carp about how that's dead, but DeAndre Ayton is as much of a throwback type of center, like 5-tool center, as we have. He's not going to stretch the three, but he does everything else very, very well. I look at him and My son was actually trying to get a comparison for me. And I see a lot of David Robinson and DeAndre Ayton. Like Robinson was elite at basically all of the 5 tools. Ayton doesn't necessarily look like a Hall of Famer yet. It's a little early to be going that route, but he does all of those things very well, if not quite to the elite level yet. But you can see where there's room to grow into an elite level.
Yeah, so next thing, you clearly apparently been a little bit out. Ime Udoka is set to sign up with the Boston Celtics, being reported by Woj, one of those Woj bombs.
Last I saw, he was just the front runner, but yeah, that's great for him.
So Udoka, who was assistant with Brooklyn, formerly on the as an assistant coach with the former world champion Brooklyn Boston Celtics, and a great relationship with, most importantly, the 2 top players on that Boston Celtics team. And
he was an assistant with the Spurs as well. Don't discount, there was a long time spent in that organization too. So yeah, this is another guy with some pretty good credibility coming in.
Yeah, so it's got the pedigree. It's going to be a lot of what we see a lot more nowadays, which is good. The not retread hires. It's the give us someone a fresh face, a fresh start. And Udoka is going to be the next coach of the Boston Celtics. Checks a lot of boxes. If you're Boston, Joel, do you like this hire?
Absolutely, I do. Udoka was the rare player, and he didn't have a very long career, but he played with the Blazers and the Spurs especially. But I do recall watching him play, and it was shortened by injury, but there was mention of him as a potential assistant coach even when he was playing. Like, he was one of those guys who got kind of the cerebral moniker and was a good clubhouse guy. And I recall that being said, like, yeah, this kid has a future in coaching at some level if he wants it when he's done. And he was done a little bit earlier than you would expect. I think he was only playing like 7-8 years, something like that. But it was really cool for him to see him follow that. And he's been a name that's been floating around for, it feels like, about 5-6 years already, as a head coaching candidate. I know he's had interviews in the past, so I'm really happy for him. I'm happy for the Celtics. I think bringing in a former player is a smart move. Brad Stevens, for all of his X's and O's credibility, didn't have that level of credibility with players. And I think sometimes when the message starts to wear and you get doubts beginning to creep in, that's one of the first things that players can glob onto as well. Did this guy actually play in the league? Does he actually know what we're going through in this moment? And it's easy to use that as an excuse sometimes, but it might be easier to hear it from a former player's mouth who has actually been through that with you too. So I think, given all of the chemistry concerns that were there in Boston, the fact they're having to reshuffle the deck, bringing in somebody who's got that player credibility, not only because he was a player, but because he's been that assistant for a long time and he's been in Boston before, this just makes a ton of sense.
And proudly former New York Knick. Throw that out there briefly. So I think it's a pretty solid hire too. And not to be too crass about it, but he's also a black head coach in a very not used to having black head coach city, and that had a very complicated history with race, including literally having a couple of one former black player, Kyrie Irving, just recently sort of baiting that hook one more time for someone to try to latch on. And by the way, Kevin Durant sort of snickering and agreeing with them just off camera that if there are still any issues like that in Boston, like at least the organization, I know this isn't the main issue because Brad Stevens really loves how much experience he has as an assistant, but this does check, like I said, one of those other boxes that really sort of helps, along with the experience and the relationship with the 2 top players on the team.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. And as we spoke about a couple episodes ago, it is time for there to be more black head coaches in the league. And I know that number kind of wavers. It's gone up at various points. It seemed like it was low over the last couple of years again. And it's not just the racial aspect of it and the fact that most of your players are black. Having black head coaches is a good thing too. But it goes back to what I was saying before. The lack of opportunity has been glaring. so many times. So just to be given the opportunity and just to get fresh blood and fresh ideas and fresh voices, and not to keep going back and hiring a guy for a fourth, fifth time for a different stint when he's 65 years old. And I'm not being ageist, because obviously there's a huge amount of value to have an older coach with all that experience. Absolutely.
You're just coming from Mike D'Antoni's head. That's all.
Exactly. he actually was the one I was thinking that I had in mind. But there is something to be said about the league continues to evolve, and the role for that really experienced sage voice, that older guy, may not be the head coach. It may be as an assistant who can still bring everything he brings to the table, but to have that younger voice and that more connected voice with today's players, I don't think that should be underestimated, and I'm glad to see that the Celtics, hopefully weren't.
And I'll be honest with you, I think Brad Stevens has sort of had kind of like lost the narrative, so to speak, with the Celtics over the last couple seasons. I know they still played hard and they're pros and they want to win and such, but I think unless you get over that hump, that message gets kind of tired quickly. And from the reporting I see is that Brad Stevens wasn't exactly slow to take a step down from the coaching spot to accept a GM spot when it was finally offered once Danny Ainge said he was going to step away. All right, well, so let's wrap it up if you don't mind. Tonight we got a big matchup in the Eastern Conference Finals. We call it the ECF. That's how we're cool. Joel, just give me 30,000-foot view, or maybe deeper if you want to go here. What do you expect game one between these two behemoths, the two teams we expected to be here at the beginning of the season are here?
Except for the whole not part, right?
Yeah, that's right.
If I'm the Hawks, I look at the blueprint of what the Nets were able to bait the Bucks into, and I look at my roster and go, those Nets were really shallow up front. My team, with John Collins, Clint Capella, and Okongwu coming off the bench, they're not shallow up front. And those guys can move. They're not slow-footed plodding centers. They are athletic. So I'm going to single cover Giannis as often as I can and make him work his tail off. And I'm going to make the other Bucks try to beat me. Drew Holiday has not had a good playoffs whatsoever. Let's try to bait Drew Holiday into taking standstill threes. Chris Middleton has come through in some pretty big moments, which we talked about in that game 7 of the Milwaukee-Brooklyn series. The Bucks don't win that without Chris Middleton, but he has not had a great semifinals. So I try to bait him into iso ball and tough shots. And I've got the wings to do that, even though I'm missing some of my best defensive wings and Cam Reddish, who might be available during this series, though I highly doubt if he gets quality minutes, and DeAndre Hunter will not appear. But I've got the length, I've got the bodies to throw at Chris Middleton. I'm not real worried about Brook Lopez, because even when he has an offensive game, you're still talking about a guy who tops out typically at about 18 points. Like, that's not going to kill you. So let's single cover Giannis, but let's be real aggressive with him, real physical. We'll wall up if we have to, and let's see if he gets passive, and let's dare those other guys to beat us. And then on the other end, if you're the Hawks, you're swinging the ball, you're putting the ball in Trae Young's hands. You've got a really tough matchup now, because Trae Young's got to go against Drew Holiday. And Holiday, as bad as he's been on the offensive end, is still one of the best defenders in the league at the guard position. And the Nets were able to throw out Bruce Brown defensively on Trae Young. It ain't the same. It's not the same. So Young's going to have another difficult series, but the threat of Trae Young is as dangerous as the reality of Trae Young, and his willingness to pass has been what's really critical. So if the Bucks are not flying on defense, Atlanta will pick you apart, and they will keep moving. And they've got guys who are not just standstill shooters. That's what I really like about these Hawks. You look at Bogdan Bogdanovic and Kevin Huerter, for example, and you go, oh, okay, there's just a couple of white standstill shooters. No, either of those guys can put the ball on the floor, right? They can get to the mid-range. They're more athletic than you think. They can finish at the rim. You don't want them doing a lot of that, but they can. Gallinari is really, really deceptive with the pump fake. He's got that old slow man's game going on now at this point in his career, but it still works. And Lou Williams is and has been like the king of the pump fake, right? The ability to get somebody up in the air and to relocate and get the shot that he wants. So the Bucks got to fly. They cannot close out lazily because the Hawks can knock it down standstill, but you still have to be really deliberate and disciplined against these Hawks because of that ability to get you up in the air and then drive. And if I'm Milwaukee, well, I'll let you go first here, and then we'll get to Milwaukee's side of things.
Well, I was gonna bring up that the Bucks are 8-point favorites going into tonight's game, and
I don't feel that.
That feels like a on paper bet, not a what we've seen in the playoffs in the history of the Mike Budenholzer Milwaukee Bucks. I do think that Atlanta has been more than sporty this postseason, and you could just sort of point to Herter's performance in Game 7 to sort of show you that it's not just the Trae Young show. And Nate McMillan has been excellent this postseason. He's been excellent this entire season since he was brought in interim-wise. I don't know the sea legs they have against Milwaukee. I think they ran into a team with a bit of a basket case in Ben Simmons and one superstar who was sort of hampered. And I think they gave him a big shot early and were just a mentally tougher team in those games. The fact that they were able to come back 2 giant deficits against that team and to win says a lot to me about this Atlanta Hawks team. And Milwaukee, I can't trust them as far as I can throw them, man. Like, I almost think that you and I talk about Milwaukee a lot in the same vein of Mike Budenholzer. Like, okay, I don't know if Milwaukee feels lucky to have gotten out of that Brooklyn series, or if they feel
they should, or they really should,
or and decided that they needed to learn something from that series, or they felt like they were the better team and they were going against they were going for a long series anyway. But I don't trust Mike Budenholzer in huge games overall, and his history has sort of shown that to me. So, Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals to me is a huge game, because it's a tone. It could be a tone setter at home. And
prior to this, Nate McMillan has not had a good playoff reputation and track record either. No. So in a lot of ways, maybe the coaching cancels each other out. Although Nate McMillan looks like the guy who's learned something, right? He looks like the guy who's been able to make some adjustments, and his players have responded. Whether that's just
like Mike Budenholzer's the guy that whole postseason was like, "What are you doing?" Like, not the postseason. I'm sorry, the Brooklyn series. Like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And McMillan sort of being like, "Wow, that's working. Wow, that's kind of amazing." So I don't know. I think I like Milwaukee to come away with this series, but that's purely because one team has a very recent MVP, and I think on paper, if you just rolled out the ball, which is kind of how I feel with Budenholzer's coaching, they'll probably be able to win 4 out of 7. So I kind of feel like I'm leaning that way with Milwaukee in Game 1 tonight at home, just not by 8 points.
If I'm the Bucks, I do not want to see PJ Tucker in the starting lineup again this entire series. He had a purpose against Brooklyn, even though I felt it was questionable in the amount of minutes he played, but he did just enough. He is not needed at that level, and his offensive shortcomings are really, really apparent at this stage of his career. Bobby Portis, who hardly played in the Brooklyn series, I think now has to have a role in this one because he matches up a lot better against Collins and Okongwu and Clint Capella and so forth. He also provides you that offensive punch, even though he's not the same defensive player that Tucker is, or at least Tucker's reputation is. Still, I mean, this starts and stops with Giannis. If Giannis is going to play with the same sort of desperation that Chris Middleton showed in Game 7, if he's going to play with that around the basket and that level of aggressiveness to try to get John Collins in early foul trouble, to challenge the rim, the Bucks have a chance because it will open up other guys like Middleton, like Holiday, like Pat Connaughton, who probably gets the start instead of PJ Tucker. It'll open up those guys for easier looks in rhythm instead of dribble, yeah, now I guess I'll shoot, which has been the problem for all of them. That lack of rhythm, that lack of ball movement. Giannis can't do it alone, obviously, so Holiday has to put forth a good offensive handful of games in this series. Like, it has to happen at some point. I don't know if it's been nerves or he's dinged up or it's just a cold streak. Those happen to even the best NBA players, but at some point you got to break out of it, and Drew is due. Like, Drew is just flat out due for a really big game here, and one of those nights where he puts up 38 points because he is capable of that, you know, and shoots 60% from the floor. Milwaukee's going to need that. Like, they don't have enough punch from other sources. And it feels weird because they were one of the best offensive teams in the league all year, but they're slogging right now. And Middleton, I think if he can have a couple of big games and you offset that with Holiday, they're in this series to win it. If you can get big games out of Holiday and Middleton at the same time, then the Hawks are in big trouble. And then I think you start to see the cracks begin to show with the youth of that team. So defensively, if I'm the Bucks, it's a toss-up. Do I want to put Giannis on Clint Capella and then let him roam? Because Capella's going to stay within the paint and within the dunker spot. But the problem with that is as soon as you pull off of Capella, that's when the lob goes straight to him, right? And that's when he's dunking at the rim. So you almost have to put Giannis on John Collins, who you have to guard a little bit more with a little more awareness because he's going to float, he's going to backdoor cut, he's going to get to the dunker spot too. You put Giannis on there, you put Brook Lopez on Capella and make sure that Lopez just stays in the paint as much as he can until he gets caught in that pick and roll. It's going to be really interesting what the Bucks do with that defensive question, because that then has a domino effect on how they guard Trae Young out of the pick and roll. The good news for them is when you have Drew Holiday, you don't wind up having to switch quite as much as you would with a normal defender. And that, too, is where Bobby Portis might wind up being more valuable in this series because of his mobility than Brook Lopez is.
You brought it up before. Which Milwaukee team are we going to see? First round, semis. Which set of dudes, which coaching, which intensity level, which execution level are we going to see? And listen, if Giannis ends up putting up 35 points and shoots 55% and puts up double-doubles that way and gets like 12 rebounds, yeah, they'll be in the game. You know, just how far into the game, we'll see.
Here's how I'll make my predictions. If we see first-round Bucks, they win in 5. If we see second-round Bucks, Atlanta wins in 7. That's my prediction. And we haven't taken predictions for the Clippers and Suns. I do think the Clippers can keep fighting. They were my pick to get to the NBA Finals out of the Western Conference.
So don't get off them now.
But at this point, at this point, I'm going to take Suns in 6. The magic is there. Like,
listen, I'm still on the Nuggets. There. I'm still on the Nuggets. Like I'm
living the now, man.
I'm not calling them dead until there's officially a Western Conference champion that's not the Nuggets. That's all. All right, that's it for our BbA Bytes. Joel, say goodbye to the nice people who are listening and or watching on the YouTubes.
Chomp chomp, thanks for the bite. And remember, you can catch the audio-only version of this show on Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, if you're listening audio only, come on over, check out the video version on YouTube, search BbA or Basketball by Association. Give us a like, a share, subscribe. We really appreciate it.